get Europe back on track by putting Europe's national democracies back in control.
We know that the political situation is difficult because the Union becoming increasingly centralized organization, constraining the member states in holding its policy on them.
Una confederazione di stati indipendenti e sovrani, un'Europa di popoli fieri della propria appartenenza, che collaborano con la massima solidarietà sui grandi temi di questa epoca.
Бъдещето на Европа означава за нас повече сигурност, означава охрана на националните граници, на външните граници, означава недопускане на нелегална миграция, недопускане на износ на тероризъм в нашите държави от държави, в които се водят.
Return policy can never make up for border security. What we should do then is to point to these facts, talk about migrants, instead of using the word refugee when it's not about that. We should present clear policy alternatives.
Покрай тези огромни беженски потоци се инфилтрират и подобни хора, които след това се занимават с тероризъм, с организиране на престъпни структури, мрежи, трафик на хора, трафик на наркотици, оръжие и така нататък. Това намалява сигурността в Европа.
И не забравяйте нашата основна битка – Европа да се върне там, където трябваше да бъде, именно в Европа на суверените отечества. Благодаря ви.
We want to rebuild Europe as a community that will offer our countries a platform for cooperation, that will promote European prosperity and security for generations to come.
Dobra vam večer i dobrodošli na međunarodnu konferenciju Budućnost Europe.
Tappaglioggio in Croazia, ospiti della nostra collega Ruža Tomasić.
Sve se promijenilo u posljednjih godinu dana. Ova pandemija je promijenila ne samo način na koji funkcionira Europski parlament, nego i način života ljudi.
Vogliamo semplicemente rendere il progetto dell'Unione credibile, rendendola veramente vicina ai bisogni dei cittadini e dando una prospettiva di crescita, sviluppo e sicurezza alle nostre nazioni e al nostro continente.
Establishment europejski też który jest coraz bardziej pannarodowy, lekceważy głosy obywateli, którzy są zakorzenieni w swoich wspólnotach, którzy kochają swoją ojczyznę, swój język, są przywiązani do tradycji i do Europy taką, jaką ona była. Dlatego my musimy pokazać jasno tę inną możliwość, inną wizję Europy, dokonać resetu Unii Europejskiej. Mam nadzieję, że
El principio de proporcionalidad debería de estar más vigente que nunca para que la Unión Europea actúe buscando el equilibrio entre el medio ambiente, la economía y los aspectos sociales. Han ido, como decimos, es una frase que decimos en España, como pollo sin cabeza. Es decir, han reaccionado no en su debido momento.
Kad se radi o proračunu, da se to sporo donosi teško.
Het is heel belangrijk dat we ook als Europa rondom dat inenten samenwerken. Dat we er ook voor zorgen dat de vaccinatiemiddelen zo snel mogelijk beschikbaar komen. Zodat we ook tempo kunnen maken met het inenten.
Tu su najviše štete imali mali poljoprivrednici.
Da smo mi kao pojedinci, kao skupina, kao naroda svedeni na to, i to nije samo slučaj u Hrvatskoj, da razmišljamo od danas do sutra.
Nije dobro da Europska unija nameće nekakve ideološke teme i određene agende. To bi trebala prepustiti državama članicama da brinu za svoj identitet, identitet društva.
They should be reluctant to hand over more powers on health policy to Brussels. Already last year it is clear that the EU overstepped its powers. The corona crisis was then abused to introduce a massive EU debt, EU bonds and also EU taxes. The next generations will suffer from it, not benefit.
Europa nije Amerika i ne može funkcionirati kao federalna država.
Occorre cambiare questa Europa, riscoprendo il vero significato delle parole solidarietà e sussidiarietà.
Bună seara!
Good evening. Welcome to the fourth stop, or however you want to call it, of a European tour in which we speak a lot about the present, but especially about the future. Today, it is the fourth stop of the ECR Europe's Future tour. What is ECR? You will find out in a second. Maybe just a simple Google search will help you. It is the conservatory and reformist group in the European Parliament. We are today at the fourth stop because we already stopped, or the Europeans have already stopped in Warsaw and Zagreb as well, and Sofia. And you've seen the images before that I'm referring to. Today's meeting has 3 parts, or 3 panels, as the British call it. We will refer about politics in all the 3 parts, but about 3 topics that regard all of us. The first is sovereignty. The second is the close-to-home policy, or the localism. And the third, the fundamental rights. And our political job starts in a couple of seconds with a word of one of the 2 co-chairs of the ECR group. It is Professor Richard Legutko.
Events of the ECR Europe's future tour across Europe. After Warsaw, Sofia and Zagreb, we are live today from Bucharest. For far too often, every time a great debate is launched about Europe's future, they have tried to tell us that the choice was between just 2 possibilities: more Europe or no Europe. So we have started this campaign across Europe to explore with national leaders, experts and civil society and citizens of our countries a sensible middle way between these 2 extremes. The fact is that we are positive about the principle of European cooperation amongst our nations, and for many years after its creation, the old European community achieved a great deal. With the overthrow of Soviet oppression in the 1990s, we had a chance to build a united Europe of sovereign states across the whole continent. But then, Europe started to lose its way through over-centralization and bureaucracy. Respect for national traditions and diversity was replaced by an obsession with enforcing a single ideological viewpoint and a one-size-fits-all approach. So our idea is to stimulate a new debate, to offer a new hope for Europe, to discuss ways we can put our national democracies back at the heart of the European idea. A Europe where we can create jobs through economic growth, defend our borders from uncontrolled migration, protect our environment at a cost we can afford, and work with global partners to ensure our security and prosperity. Thank you for joining us today. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but I look forward to following the discussion. No doubt we will hear a lot today that the answer is not more Europe, but more Romania. I hope the event goes well.
La întrebarea
For the question, more Europe or no Europe, the answer was absolutely brilliant. Nu mai multă Europa, ci mai multă România. Thank you, Professor, for this video. We have 70 minutes of political show in which you can jump in. Do not forget to use hashtag #AskResetEU. So hashtag #AskResetEU. Ask about reset, well, if we are to translate it in Romanian, it's a bit more difficult, but it's about, well, restarting it, right? As I said, 70 minutes of having with us politicians, but also representatives of the civil society, people that ask questions, people that answer. And with respect to questions, do not forget to send your question. What we have to understand is that we speak of the present, but about the future most of all. And when we speak of the future, I want you to know that apart from experts, politicians, and the civil society, I would like to salute the special participation of Mr. Władysław Ordylt, the chair of the Polish region, Gorpart Party, the chair of the ECR group within the Committee of the Regions. It is an extraordinary moment. I never started such an initiative, but it is really my pleasure to give the floor now to the chair of the institutional policy reform within the ECR, Professor Ladislav Krasnoversky, who could explain why it is important for the public to be aware of the way in which the federalist vision in Brussels for Europe's future undermines the national democracies. We have a message about the reason why we need to continue to fight. These have decreased, so the land have decreased. They couldn't have an external policy. In such a federation, many people will have more to say. 80 million Germans will always win in a voting with 20 million Romanians. Apart from that, a true democracy is possible when we have a strong cultural community, because democracy is really rooted in such a society. The feeling that links us to Europeans is poorer than or weaker than the feeling linking us to our co-nationals. This is why such an initiative really doesn't stand a chance. So the meeting with the main topic of today's conference is about sovereignty. And I will quote a message that is very important. The ECR group believes that the future of Europe should rely on a Europe of sovereign nations that cooperate and help each other. To my left and the right-hand side are those to whom we owe this meeting. But before introducing them, the two guests in this first panel, let's take a look at the intro of this first part. To my right-hand side is Mr. Cristian Terhes, PNTCD Vice President, leader of the ECR Romanian delegation in the European Parliament. Good evening. Thank you for being with us. Good evening. And to my left-hand side, Mr. Aurelian Pavelescu, the PNTCD President. Thank you, Mr. Pavelescu, for the opportunity of learning a new language, the political language, that is very useful to know in order to understand all of these things. So apart from that, apart from these two gentlemen that you see next to me, we have other guests. Raffaele Fitto, co-chair of the ECR group. Let's say hello if you see him. And there he is. In addition, we have with us Mr. Angel Jambavski, the leader of the Bulgarian national movement that is currently part of the Bulgarian parliament. I would like you to know, if I could say it again, you might believe I insist on it, but let me tell you, I want to know the things that worry you, your comments. Please send them at the hashtag AskResetEU. Mr. Terhes, are we ready to tell the people valuable things? And I will start with you, if I may. Tell me a bit about, well, this word that we speak of. If we Google it, we'll find what it means on sovereignty. But why do we speak more of it? Well, the reason for which in the EU, and we see that in Romania as well, there are all and more voices speaking of sovereignty, of nation, of the country, is a result of the fact that in the past 20-something years, everything with respect to national, local authority, national decision, started to be, taken from the European level or the national level to the Brussels level, let's say, over European level. But see that Europe has gone through serious crisis, the most recent COVID generated, and people don't understand if in the past years the opinion was that somebody from outside of their country has the best solution for the problems or crises that the country is facing. Look, the real crises show that the best solutions come from the authorities that are closer to the citizens. And if we take a look at the level of trust, including in Romania or in the EU level, the EU citizens trust more their mayors than in their ministers. They trust more their parliament members than in their ministers, and they trust more their ministers than in European institutions. And the further away a public authority is from the citizen, the lower the trust in that authority. This is why the discussion that we currently have in the EU is where we want to keep this decision-making closer as possible to the citizens, and for the citizens to be those that at cross points choose their officials or elect their officials to lead their destinies, or do we delegate this authority at over-national level? This is why there are all the more and more voices saying that we have to keep our sovereignty. So our own decisions as close to us as possible, and not to give them onto others that were not with us, that can't be made accountable, and not necessarily to be made accountable, but, so as I said, not to be made, they can't be made accountable for the decisions that they take. It was surprising for me as well to see very many Romanians with a growing interest in this concept of sovereignty. Romania was the country with the highest level of trust in the EU, but in the past year, starting with 2015, the Romanians' trust has decreased. Between 2015 and 2016, it's a drop of 25% in the trust level in Romania towards the EU institutions. So all the more citizens are interested in the nation, the country, and sovereignty. This is a plus for us. It is the position that our party is also part of, so the National Peasant Christian Democratic Party, to keep this decision as close as possible and to make the citizens have the power and accountability to their own decisions. Mr. Pavlescu, is this a fashion? Because this is what it seems to those that are not the connoisseurs of politics. Well, allow me first to thank our audience on behalf of our National Peasant Christian Democrat Party, one of the oldest in Romania, that has quite a long-standing tradition. On the other hand, allow me to open this issue that is quite painful. Sovereignty, sovereignism, identity movements, what happens today in Europe. We speak of this feeling called Romania. Is it an experiment or more than it? Well, it's some sort of sterile discussions of notions that people do not understand, of projects and promises that have no foundation, and they're not covered in reality. That is why very, very briefly we have to speak of the experiment called Romania. My generation brought down communism in December '89. Friends of mine died at gunshot from the communists. Quite the bloody situation. My generation had the objective that Romania come back to its European cradle of a old civilization of thousands of years, and to somehow escape the communist catch. Well, this ended in '89. It's not stories, it's an awful reality. And I hope that coming to Europe, something beautiful might happen. And the party that I am part of and that I run today is the party of the former political detainees, of those that know me. Many of them died in prison, those that survived. Corneliu Coposu was the chair of the party, 17 years imprisoned in communist prisons. With Ion Diaconescu, Ion Rațiu, they held on and lived to re-establish this historical party. And they were the first to mitigate, to fight for the European accession. So a pro-European party by nature. What was said then? Come to the Europe of nations, come to the Europe of founders. of Conrad of Gasperi. We all read delighted of the Europe of nations, the European, the Europe of solidarity and the European values. There were very many sacrifices made for a society that did not understand. It was dominated by the communist mentality, and we paid the political price for the courage of these great political leaders. We now, 31 years later, we draw a line, and this is the experiment called Romania. 31 years later, Romania no longer has industry at all. Romania no longer has agriculture at all. Health and education are at the brink of collapse. Justice is politicized and controlled by secret service. But the most tragic of all is that 5 million Romanians were forced to leave the country, to look for a job, the greatest brain drain in history. The nation is basically, lacking structure anymore. How is this possible in a country that maybe is among the richest with respect to resources, or in the top five, in the top 5 richest with respect to resources like gold, like fertile soil and other minerals, forests, so great resources? How is it possible for this country to become almost like a slave, and millions of people not find their place in the country, to almost have some generations that are extinct, if we can't say so? Because politicians followed the road indicated by Brussels, by the EU. You have to privatize, you have to change there, tweak there. We did that. And we are now in a critical situation of collapse of the nation. The reason for this is that the European Union changed its ideology. And from the ideology of founders, they moved on to a globalist, aggressive neo-Marxism of destroying the nations, of destroying religions, of destroying the national identity for the interest of great corporation and global technocrats. It's today a situation in the old communist utopia comes back in another shape. What did they say? We want to make the new person, the new individual without memory. You know, the same idea we hear from Brussels, that there's no need for God, there's no need for memory. Let's change history books. Let's attack churches, religions, the family. This is what communists told us 50, 60 years ago, but differently phrased. But this matter is an issue of life, of reality. These are no stories. We are a nation that is destructured. We speak of sovereignty. Sovereignty is in our constitution. Sovereignty is in the constitution of all European countries. By what right do bureaucrats that do not have the vote of the people behind them say? Those that claim that they are sovereignists, they are Eurosceptic. But this EU was not created with the Wasn't it created with the sovereign will of the parties? And now these bureaucrats come and say, we no longer need sovereign peoples. We no longer need sovereignty. Let me tell you that there are very many questions from our distinguished audience. And apologize for the interruption. I would like to go to Italy, to Raffaele Fitto, co-chairman of the ECR group. Good evening. Thank you. Thank you for organizing this 4th step of our tour. I would like to thank the organizers for the tour that really brings back an important interest. And I love the proposal of an alternative Europe. Europe is threatened. The authors are not capable of recognizing these flaws. The European Union is often incapable of making its citizens or earning the trust of its citizens. We have to know our roots. We have to defend our own values, not of the institutions. We have to be able to set our own rules. We have to defend our sovereignty of our people. We can't take the liberty of saying what's right and what's not in the governments that we elect. This is the battle that we conservatives lead in Europe, in having a free and sovereign community, to observe the principle of subsidiarity, to observe the values, the differences, the Europe of nations. What I also listened in the previous speakers' interventions, this effort to go further of our group has quite the purpose, and I am sure that strengthening the family principles are all important goals, but they risk being jeopardized by the elections at European level. This is why our group had this initiative to build an alternative in the European conference, to relearn the rules, the important rules in the change, and to be effective in the functioning of Europe. Thank you as well, Mr. Fito. If we could go to Bulgaria, to Mr. Angel Jambarsky, the leader of the Bulgarian National Movement.
To Christian for having us here and for organizing this part of our, let's say, our version of this Future of Europe event, because we are this year, and we are the first, maybe only for now, political party on European level, European party united all the sovereign countries and discussing all the European issues and discussing the future of Europe, because we believe in Europe of sovereign nations. We believe of all aspects of this kind of Europe obliged to European sovereign nations and everything related on this. So thank you, Mr. Tersh, thank you, Mr. Fito, our co-chair, and dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. The future of Europe is a Europe of sovereign nations, as I said. We believe in this, and we will do everything to achieve it. We have seen the nation states respond much more quietly to crisis and manage to overcome problems which more adequately by making decisions on their own. That is why we must not just stop but reverse the process of centralization and so-called federalization of European Union. Today marks the 20th anniversary of the Treaty of Nice, technocratic treaty that restricts democracy and threatens the sovereignty of the member states, a treaty of a series of such pushing us towards some kind of superstate. A well-known fact is that Lisbon Treaty was prepared as European constitution to constitute European federal states with all signs of superstate, European superstate, everything we oppose to. We believe that strong European nations, strong and sovereign member states, are a mandatory condition for strong and effective European Union. We believe so. We have seen that when Europe borders were under siege by illegal migrants, Bulgaria, Greece, Italy, and Spain have made every effort to stop and have stopped the invasion of illegal migrants. Unfortunately, they have not received sufficient support from either the European institutions or leading member states. German Chancellor Angela Merkel was allowed herself to invite the illegal migrants. She said, we schaffen das. In German, it means we will achieve that, and she cannot. So, she said this on behalf of all Europeans, but this is not the case. However, I believe that to a large extent our countries defended Europe. Today, in the context of the pandemic, of so-called, not so-called, pandemic of Chinese virus, because this is Chinese virus, and we are obliged to say so. This is Chinese virus. This is not happening from the blue, from nothing. This is Chinese virus. So we see that, again, nation states are managing to cope without the intervention of European bureaucratic institutions. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I believe you notice that European Commission and all the bureaucratic body against European Commission, they failed. They failed very hard. They failed without doubt. They failed in the beginning of the crisis, and they failed even now when we are discussing distribution of so-called vaccines. Because all of us, we agreed to develop together all the vaccines, and now we face huge amount of problems with all these pharmaceutical companies paid by our citizens, by Italian citizens, by Bulgarian citizens, by Romanian citizens, by Spanish citizens. We face this. We face their huge, epic failure. So, the last indicated fact is the contract between the European Commission and a number of these companies. I would like not to mention companies in order not to, let's say, interfere with the private companies, but you know the name of these companies. And the same contract drawn by the British government, which, however, is much more detailed and clear deadlines and requirements. Every one of you, I believe, you will agree. British government deal much more successfully with all the contracts with these pharmaceutical companies we deal to. I think these two examples show how we need to reverse the process of federalization this wrong way, to preserve the position aspects of the Union, and this is undoubtedly the free market and the movement of people and capital, but this is time for a less but more efficient Europe in service to Europeans, to sovereign European nations. As once Baroness Thatcher said, let Europe be a family of nations, understanding each other better, appreciating each other more, doing more together, but relishing our national identity no less than our common European endeavor. So, dear colleagues, we are facing time of change now. We have to, we need to decide Europe of nations or this bureaucratic, weak European Union federalistic fake state. So, once again, thank you for inviting me. I'm here to answer and to discuss. Thank you.
Și noi vă mulțumim.
Thank you as well, Mr. Jambavsky. I have to tell you there are very many questions. I will only select 4. I will start with those for our distinguished guests abroad. For Mr. Raffaele Fitto, it's about the Green Deal program. Does this program has the aspects that breach the sovereignty of certain European countries? Mr. Fitto.
Sì, questo programma.
This program is a very ambitious program of the European Commission. We discussed the program a lot. This is a commitment for 25% of the resources for the entire European budget. The amount is about 320 billion euro, quite an important amount, so very important objectives. to reduce by 2030 the carbon emissions, to reach zero by 2050, and the risk is that Europe, who imagines that she can accomplish this, Europe does not take into account the difference between these themes, the starting point of various countries, and the risk is not only to undermine sovereignty, but it needs to take into account the limits, the conditions, and the use of such resources. Obviously, the objective is ambitious. There must be an objective, there must be a goal, I agree, but we need to take into account the fact that there is an entrepreneurial, an organizational system which is specific to each country, and we need to keep this in mind, and we need to have regard to the sovereignty and to the choices made by each and every country. Currently, in every country, there are discussions on the resources they have to use, and there is a great momentum, but all these should be included in the dynamics specific to each country. The European Union decides on the industrial policies of a member state, but it's different. There is one thing to reach a goal and try to achieve it without taking into account the starting point in every country, the industrial system in every country, the international competition, the specific situation of each government, how each government can accomplish their targets. As colleague Jambaski was mentioning, he talked about the vaccines, and there are differences here. We have the European Commission who informs us, but the Green Deal is high on the Commission's agenda, and we need to take into account the real opportunities or possibilities, because otherwise everything again will turn into a slogan. We've heard all sorts of statements about the vaccines, and the European Commission stated that everything will move very fast and there will be no delays. But yesterday, the European Council, having regard to the protests by the states, took note of the seriousness of the situation. So the Green Deal cannot turn into a slogan. We must imagine that a young person going to various countries should be able to see what are the clear choices in each and every country, and we can discuss on this. We need to take into account the competencies and the choices of every country. Thank you for this highly elaborate answer. I do have a question, but again, ask questions using hashtag #AskResetEU. I have a question for Mr. Jambaski. To what extent the Brussels policies on migration are breaching the national sovereignty of Bulgaria?
Well, thank you for this question. Of course, I would say, let's say, European Commission decisions regarding the migration are very harmful for Bulgaria, for Italy, for example. We discussed this with Mr. Fito a lot of times. They are very harmful for our Spanish colleagues also. Because bureaucrats in Brussels, they want to let's say, convince us that we need to allow everyone on our border to come here and to say, I am a refugee, I'm a migrant. But in fact, they are not refugees. Well, if we are talking about refugees, we are obliged under the European nations agreements to help this person. But persons on our border, they are not refugees, they are migrants. And a lot of them are not legal migrants. We face a huge hypocrisy now on behalf of European Committee. They try to establish, let's say, so-called name irregular migrant. But there are no regular or irregular migrants. We have legal or illegal migrants. So we, the border countries, Bulgaria, Greece, Italy is the most harmed, and together with Spain because of their sea border, we face a huge wave, a tsunami of illegal migrants. And European Committee, they try to convince us that these people are irregular. They are not regular or irregular, they are illegal. If they want to come here in European Union, they need to go to our border checkpoints, to our borders, and to show themselves. But they are not doing this. They are using all the channels paid and sponsored by far left in Europe. From all so-called liberals, they use illegal ways, they use illegal boats, they use boats which are, let's say, endangering their lives. And they ask us to accept this behavior. This is not acceptable. So, from my point of view, maybe it will be a little bit, let's say, hard, but this is our statement here. So, from our point of view, from Bulgarian, I believe so. I am speaking very much on behalf of our colleagues in the southern border of European Union. We believe that European Union, of course, need to establish much more, let's say, harder and tough border. Because we are in Romania now, thank you, Christian, once again. Let me remind you that we face a number of illegal migrants shipped from Turkey to Romania, to port of Constanța, illegal migrants, and they believe that they can, let's say, establish this kind of route to Romania. Are you agree to have these people in Constanța? I don't think so. If this is up to me, I will very strong against. So we need to have common European answer, common European protocol of protecting of our external borders, because we need to protect our borders, our homes, our societies. And I believe this is our way to answer this provocation made by Turkey, for example, made by a number of, let's say, not so European and friendly states in the Middle East. So we need to protect our way of life, our homes, our families, our streets, our towns, etc. That is my answer. Thank you so very much.
Vă mulțumim și noi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dzhambazki. Quite elaborate. I would ask you now, Mr. Pavelescu, why is the National Peasant Christian Democratic Party a sovereign party, and how do you comment on what has been said so far? Our party is the party which accomplished the Greater Romania in 1918. For the first time after centuries, the three Romanian principalities were united, and then we had Romania back then, and not the entire Romania, because a large part of it is even today broken from Romania. We are talking about the Republic of Moldova, Bukovina, Northern Bukovina, other territories which were removed by the Soviet Union together with Hitler from the body of our country, and this is a historical injustice which our party does not accept even today. So this party which created the Greater Romania is the party which fought the communism, which shed blood, is the party which led Romania towards the EU and NATO, and it's the same party which says today that this European Union, which de facto is a federalist state, has turned into the Soviet Union. We experienced this. We had this experience. I'm not the first one to say this. The foreign minister of the UK said this before the Brexit, and many other politicians which took action. We see the Brexit, we see UK exited the European Union, and that was not a whim, that was not a fashion. This is a very tough political reality. Why is our party a sovereign supporting party? Because there are no longer people in Romania. 25% of the workforce in Romania left abroad. He is humiliated in Germany, Italy, Spain. How long will we still be asparagus pickers? And this, we are talking about Romania today. The democracy is collapsing. Millions of families are dismembered. There is simply no workforce left in Romania. The country is old, and this is a party which stems from the people, from the history of the Romanian people. Every country would have its differences and specificities. We see Bulgaria fighting something, or Spain or Italy something else, but I might say that Romania is the most terrible experiment in the European Union, in a very strange manner, reaching always the bottom rankings, although we have greater resources, greater than Poland, Austria, the Netherlands, and so on, countries which came here and actually pay the lowest royalties, if any. They steal our skilled workforce, the people who learned in schools and universities with the money of the Romanian state. We no longer have doctors or researchers, nothing, and these things cannot go on, not because this is what we want, but we see identity and sovereignty movements bottom up. People no longer wait for political leaders to propose them to lead the way. Europe is actually facing a huge social and economic crisis. No one feels good. And this European Union of the federalist project is a Europe of ongoing crisis. Europe has been into crisis for 30 years. Now we are facing a new crisis. This happened in the communist times as well. We had the 5-year planning period, and Ceausescu would say that after 5 years we'll be in heaven, and after the next 5 years it was even more difficult. And this happened with Romania and Bulgaria and with more developed countries like Italy. And we've been waiting for 30 years from the European Union to take us to heaven, and it's more and more difficult, and we see entire nations disappearing. Now, with regards to the migration policies and the Green Deal policies, we see such debates in the USA, in China, everywhere in the world. In the USA, such debates became very harsh. We are talking about Trump and the Republicans against the Democrats. These are universal topics which are managed and are directed by, let's call it, a global technocracy, and they speak the same in Washington or Brussels and elsewhere, and they say, we no longer need states, we no longer need nations, we no longer need people eventually, because we still believe in God? This is 19th, 18th medieval thing. We no longer need families, children, we no longer need families. But did they ask the people, the nations, if they want this? So this bottom-up movement, and here, this is a signal for my colleagues, unless these movements are channeled by legitimate political parties which share democratic values, like the National Peasant Christian and Democratic Party, this matter of an Europe of the nations. Iuliu Maniu, the founder of our party, spoke of this in 1926, about the Europe of nations. So these movements may derail and into chaos. Well, we are obviously in a hurry. I would like Mr. Terhes a brief answer to my question. To what extent the sovereignty of the EU member state is respected by the European institutions? I think every speaker noted a shortcoming of the EU. In the past years, this Brussels bureaucracy tried to come up with the solutions, one size fits all, to provide solutions for everybody, and this is impossible. We've heard the Bulgarian colleague talking about the migrant or illegal migrant problems for moving from Turkey to Europe. We heard the problems in Italy. They know very well the migrant issue. But if you go to Spain, to Portugal, if you come to Romania, we all are facing our own problems. And for the Brussels bureaucracy, they might seem not important. Why do we care about your problems in Romania? These problems are not significant compared to other EU problems. But for us, that problem is important. And right now, we reach the moment when crucial decisions about Romania are no longer approached or solved because will not be voted. There are people in the European Parliament, for example, who reach agreements with different groups that form a majority, and we say, what are we doing about this problem? Well, leave it aside, and then it will be no longer solved. So the reason why we see more and more voices, as Mr. Pavelescu mentioned, we see bottom-up reactions, simple people who say this is no longer possible, something must change. And I think this is our mission as a political party in Romania and as a group in the European Parliament to be the voice of these people who actually ask for their rights. Thank you very much, Mr. Fito, Jambaski, Pavelescu, Terhes. Thank you very much. Now we will have the second panel of our meeting. I would like you to know that in the second part of our conference, we are going to follow together a special interview with the ECR leader in the Regions Committee. And I will get back soon with the second part when we are going to speak more about a very important topic, the localism policy, the close-to-home policy.
The ECR Group is the voice of Eurorealism, the sensible middle way, more Europe and no Europe, with respect for the sovereignty of Europe, with less bureaucracy, more fiscal responsibility, and equality for all member states. We believe the peoples of Europe want the European Union to do less and to do it better, to promote economic recovery and growth and more jobs, to help, not hinder our countries in getting immigration under control, to deliver a clean environment at a cost we can afford, to work with global partners to protect our security, to create jobs through free and fair trade. Europe should only act where it can deliver real added value to member states and their citizens. By putting Europe's national democracies back in the driving seat, we can build a Europe that will offer our countries a platform for cooperation, that will help promote European prosperity and security for generations to come.
We now enter the second part of our conference, and now we speak about Europe's future, of course, and we try to find out whether we need more Brussels or more 27 nations, more regions, more cities. Will the Regions Committee help us? Do they promote the EU agenda to transfer the power from the member states? These are questions, and I would like to find answers from our next guest, Mr. Vladislav Ortil, who is the president of the Podparke region and chairman of the ECR group at the Committee of the Regions, and we need to ask something which is very important for us. What does the ECR do in the Committee of the Regions to make sure that the future belongs to sovereign nations? Good evening, Mr. Ortil. Good evening. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to participate in today's conference. First of all, I want to thank the deputy and the ECR group in the European Parliament. We all know that building relationships and cooperation between the Committee of the Regions and the European Parliament is very important, and it doesn't only mean action at the level of political parties. Thank you for your question. In my opinion, it's a very current question, and I want to highlight that the ECR group in the Committee of the Regions is different by the fact that it strongly believes that a decentralization of the EU is in the common interest of the entire European Union. To be successful and effective, the decentralization level is important. We are a political group at the Committee of the Regions which sees the added value of the European Union. We do not deny this, but at the same time, we are not afraid to openly criticize such centralist initiatives. And by this, we somehow influence the debate, and we also influence how the European Union looks like. In the Parliament, we often discuss matters which go beyond the treaties. We speak of abortions, the judicial reforms. All these things are then transferred to the Committee of the Regions and to the other EU institutions. I believe that we should state clearly that such actions and such manner of debate are not at all random. We need to remember that this transfer of competence from the national to the European level without the citizens being able to influence decisions, that is a negative issue, and our local authorities are elected by the citizens, but as politicians, we cannot influence the Brussels positions. I'm talking now about the positions of the bureaucrats, and just like us, presidents, mayors, we want that those provisions which are designed at European level, or the European actions, the European programs, should be as close as possible to the citizens. We want Europe to be as close as possible to the citizen, not just a slogan. There is no great discovery if we say that 70% of the European regulations and the most investment programs are being implemented at local and regional levels. The problem is that the local authorities, although they are responsible with the implementation of such European programs, actually cannot influence these regulations. In our country, 40% of the European funds are implemented by regional institutions. It is an important amount, an important percentage. and often such authorities cannot influence the projects paid with such money. I believe that the Committee of the Regions is an advisory body, and our opinions are not always mandatory, and often they are not taken into account. Sometimes our voice is listened to, but we'd like this to happen more often, and we do our best to protect subsidiarity, to be able to fight for the interests of the small local communities. First of all, we are working with the European Commission, and we want those proposals which generate costs in our cities and regions to be equally distributed. And I will give you here the example, the mobility package, which is not well distributed, and sometimes it even contradicts sustainable development. Second, we want the European Union to use a very interesting tool, a new tool, namely the macro-regional strategies. The initiative was born in the Committee of the Regions and later developed the macro-regional strategy of the Alps, a very good instrument. In my capacity as the chair of this Carpathians group in the Committee of the Regions, we fight for the development of a new regional strategy for the Carpathians. I think this is a new instrument that would be very important for Romania as well, because in Romania we have a large part of this mountain chain. As we remember in the Committee of the Regions, there is this tendency to discuss issues which are not necessarily or which do not fall under the scope of local authorities. We talk about the judicial reforms and so on, and we pay attention for nothing to such matters which are not part of the treaty. We should not be involved in these matters. What is important for us is to focus on regional development, the cohesion policy, the implementation of this policy. The Committee of the Regions does have an instrument which enables us to state our opinion. We may express our opinion on the decisions with an impact on local interests, but so far we have not used it. And maybe it was a mistake, very likely, because that would be a legal action. And I think there will be a moment when we are going to use this instrument. Thank you very much, Professor Ortil. Do you have a question, Mr. Terhes? Yes, I do have a question, because I listened very carefully, and I was not the only one. I'm very sure that many Romanians who follow the EU situation see Poland as an example, as a role model, at least in terms of EU funds absorption. And I'm happy to have you here today, because I hope we are going to continue such discussions. But you mentioned in your intervention that, unfortunately, the voice of the Committee of the Regions is not heard sufficiently by the bureaucrats in Brussels. And my question is, what do you think we should do so that the voice, not only of the Committee of the Regions, but the voice of the local communities which are represented by the Committee of the Regions, should be more articulated and listened to in Brussels?
Ja się cieszę, że pan poseł.
I am happy you tackled the topic, and that this is also noticed in the European Parliament, in Brussels. I believe that this system should be redesigned. Redesigned in such a way so as to change a little the civil servants, the staff. They're very well skilled, but many a times these civil servants have a certain element of being far from regional issues, from matters that for us are obvious. We are closer to the citizens, closer to the region, closer to the issues. In addition, the difficulty stems from the fact that we, as heads of regions, as mayors, we pay more attention to solving issues on the spot. The Euro deputies are many a times in Brussels, and they are closer to European issues. We, however, are present in our regions. We know what happens in Podkarpackie and Lombardy, and we live with these problems. In Brussels, we go seldom, all the more given the pandemics, when we just get there through the, technology. And to a great extent, we rely on the civil servants. So, in our opinion, we should tell the civil servants what the purposes are, what the real needs of the local authorities are, and we have to hold them accountable for what they did. This fourth largest group could influence the secretariat and the civil servants that are close. To the group that manages the European Committee. We take our mission quite seriously because we are aware of the fact that the European Union, throughout the years, has become more important for our inhabitants. It is important because we have new retail markets for our producers in the less developed regions, infrastructure developed. I am in a region that is among the poorest in the European Union, and the effect and dynamic of the development has changed due to the European Union, and we stress this point every time, and we really take pride in that, and we thank it for that. But this is really the merit of the European funds, and also the merit of properly spending European funds. Now, with the crisis, we ponder twice for a euro before we spend it, because indeed this should be made for long-term investments. You yourself said that Bologna is a leader Poland is a leader with respect to European funds absorption, as I said. We, in our region, Podkarpackie is among the leading regions in using European funds, and we are an example in which we stand united by conservative ideas. In Podkarpackie, we have a conservative approach, but also an innovative approach. You can bring these two issues together. There's no problem. They complement each other very well, leading great results. We wish that our model of development We don't want to impose it onto others, but at the same time, we wonder why would the European Union impose onto us models that are not good for Poland, for Romania, or for the Podcarpathia region, or for Maramuresh, for example, our Maramuresh friend region. The European policies are many times influenced by ideologies. We have this feeling that certain things are imposed without being necessary, because if somebody insists on imposing certain aspects, well, tradition is no longer observed. So really, there's also we always showed reaction to certain scenarios. Why would there? What would we see? This intention to impose solutions that were used in Portugal, in Finland, or in Romania, or in any other country. Europe's strength has to be in its diversity. Just like when we speak of the Carpathians, the beauty of the Carpathians, its potential stems also from diversity, from the heritage that we have there. The spontaneity, this desire to do great things, beautiful things, different things. We can't destroy this. And Europe shouldn't make us destroy it. And to conclude, I would like to thank once again the organizers for the possibility of this meeting. And I do hope that the collaboration and the relation between ECR and the Committee of the Regions and the European Parliament to grow further. I was really happy to be here. Thank you very much, Deputy. Thank you as well, Mr. Ortil, Mr. Terhes. Thank you so much for your very complex and elaborate answers. We will now also have a third part of our meeting, the future of Europe, that is also about protecting the citizens, the rights of the citizens in each member state. It's quite a difficult period. We've seen many countries that suppress these rights as a way of putting forward their own agendas. You will soon see in the studio ladies that represent somehow the civil society. Let's see. We speak of fundamental rights in this last part of our conference.
Sin fe no habría Europa.
La liberté est le fondement de l'Europe.
Respekt für das gemeinsame Erbe.
Tradition binds our continent.
Non c'è valore più importante della famiglia.
Europa jest dobrem wspólnym. Różnimy się, ale powinno nas łączyć wspólne dziedzictwo. Powróćmy do Unii Europejskiej, która z tego dziedzictwa wyrasta i która szanuje narodowe tożsamości. Only the European Union without arrogance, based on solidarity and mutual respect for its member states, can regain the support of the European nations. We can do it together.
We are back in our studio with Mr. Cristian Terhes, leader of the ECR Romanian delegation in the European Parliament, vice president of the National Peasant Christian Democrat Party. We have a lady, Madam Elena Radu, lawyer, and a video call with us. We have two other lawyers. Allow me to say hello to the Vice President of the Association for Dialogue and Solidarity of Lawyers, Silvana Rakovicianu. Good evening. Hello.
And the third guest, also a lawyer, Madam Silvia Uskov. Thank you for being with us. Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be with you. If we could speak a bit of fundamental rights. As a journalist, it's true, I'm rather more a person of radio, music, but I want to know what fundamental right is and what are the most important, or I don't know, what should I know about the freedom to, I know of the freedom of thinking, of speaking, the right to health, right? Are there others? There are very many other rights that the state has to provide. The right to education, to free circulation, to family life, to the right to life. Madam Radu, I can't hear you very well. I think it's a technical issue, so allow me to establish now, maybe to patch in Madam Uskov. Can you hear us? Yes. So, it's a technical issue, but this is what happens when the conference is live. If we could speak a bit about artificial intelligence and fundamental rights, because our life is filled with online. It's around online, and our link here is also online. Is it too much? What about this AI? Will it impact our fundamental right, and to what extent? Undoubtedly, artificial intelligence and the development of this field impacts fundamental rights, because nevertheless, we have to think of our rights in the future. What might limit them, the states or the private companies? And I think that lately we could see a limitation of the right to free speech. On social media, there's a clear example of impacting certain fundamental rights, and we should also really refer to in a democratic society, given the restriction of fundamental rights, we have to take all of these aspects into account and somehow raise and into discussion and debate whether we will see the reality that we know, or there will be a constitutional crisis and somehow reshaping of democracy, maybe in a new political style and regime in the world states. I will come back to you soon. In the meanwhile, the technical issue of Madam Radu has been remedied. If we could go back to whether you believe the European Union failed in guaranteeing fundamental rights, considering the fact that in this period very many fundamental rights were restricted and failing to observe the internal regulations of the member states of the European Union. In my opinion, in the COVID pandemic era, the EU failed in guaranteeing the fundamental rights of its citizens. What do you refer to? Well, I'm referring to the fact that member states, no, on the one hand, at the European Union level, we did see certain measures set for the member states to implement to fight against the spread of the virus. But these measures were implemented directly by the states without observing their own constitutional rules. So some measures were implemented by any public authority that did not have jurisdiction in this respect. On the other hand, under the umbrella of the EU, the representatives of the member states have ignored the fundamental principles that should have been observed for the limitation of the exercise of fundamental rights, that is proportionality, need, non-discrimination. And in certain situations, these have led to an limitation of the existence of the fundamental rights themselves. Many measures were implemented with something other than laws, and this led to applying at discretion certain measures during the emergency period in Romania, when all measures were taken through those military orders at that time. Although those orders didn't stipulate for certain exceptions, in practice they were implemented or enforced discretionary, and depending on certain cases, some measures were not observed and were not mandatory, basically, for certain categories of people. Many of these measures were perceived by the citizens of the European Union as taken chaotically, without a fundamental analysis of the impact that they will have to fight against the spread of the virus, and actually appeared contradictory. All of these generated quite the rebellion, if I may say so, among citizens. The perception was that in the context of the COVID pandemic, the European Union and the member states have in fact aimed at limiting even more the fundamental rights of the citizens, this restriction that was considered unjustified by some of the citizens, and reason for which, and the proof to this, is that there were very many public demonstrations and actions started before courts against the measures taken by the states of the European Union, and some of these actions were actually accepted by the court. And this COVID pandemic was the first crisis that the EU faced. What happened was proved that the European Union is not ready to cope with this crisis, and the member states are not ready to cope with such a crisis. And all of these led to an unconstitutional restriction of fundamental rights. And these restrictions and breaches of fundamental rights were not remedied in certain states even 1 year later, since the outbreak of the pandemic. And we see now that in all countries of the European Union, the death rate is maximum 0.2% of the total number of population. Well, under these circumstances, we see that the behavior, the approach of the European member states is the same, to limit as much as they can the rights of their citizens, and by no means to try to observe the rights and to remedy any breach of fundamental rights. And we see at European level that they speak more and more of bringing in a vaccination certificate for the citizens. There are voices that actually want to make it a condition for traveling throughout the EU territory to have such a vaccination certificate. Whereas imposing such a certificate is not just a breach of fundamental rights, but would actually mean straying away from the pillars of the fundamental rights. Why be citizen of the European Union, given that to travel to another state, you have to observe conditions that impact and restrict your fundamental rights? And this is what the citizens of the member states expected when accessing to the EU. They thought that their rights will be ensured and guaranteed, and they will have the right to travel freely within the EU area. And these things raise questions among the European citizens. If the European Union in this crisis couldn't cope and observe the fundamental rights and freedoms, what will happen if in the future, when maybe, unfortunately, a greater crisis than the one that we are facing appears? What will the European Union do? Will it stand by the observance of the fundamental rights, or will foreign citizens be at the mercy of the representatives of the states at that time that will be able to decide as they wish with respect to the fundamental rights of their own citizens. I will now go to Madam Silvana Racovicianu. I want to ask her to ask a question from hashtag AskResetEU. Are there cases in Romania in which the right to defense was breached? Yes, there are situations in Romania. In our case, things did not evolve as best as they could, but as my colleague Elena Radu said, in most European states there are internal turmoils in this respect. We currently have very many situations of attorneys to be heard as witnesses in issues with their own clients, thus breaching the professional secrecy. There are also attorneys that were searched without the presence of the prosecutor, as the law stipulates, and documents or data were taken from outside the cases that were under investigation, thus creating access to information protected by the same professional secrecy. Such breaches were in Romania as well. Also, attorneys were stopped from providing legal assistance to people that appeared as witnesses in criminal files. Such breaches of the right to defense were linked or not to the pandemic, but given that this is in the attention of international fora of the profession, this has been a topic in their attention for some time. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Terhes, I have a question to you for those watching us on YouTube and the official website of our conference. As Euro Parliament member, how do you see the MCV report? Well, I'm going to tell you the perspective before I was a member in the European Parliament and after. Why? Are there different things as a member in the Parliament? No, there are things that are a bit different inside the Parliament. Before I was in the European Parliament, I wondered why, after 2010, after this mechanism for cooperation and verification should have ended, why does it continue? All the more, there were 4 objectives in the initial document. If we take a look at the document today, there are 13 new objectives to reach in the MCV. Every year, some bureaucrats in Brussels bring new things and say you have to do this and this and that. It's like a moving target, as I say. I actually wondered this before I was a member in the European Parliament. I asked for clarification. I got no answer. After I got elected, I went through procedural steps to find out what about this MCV. And the crucial question that I asked was, who writes this mechanism for cooperation and verification? Every year, the European Commission prepares this report that makes it public and says to Romania, you didn't do this and that and that. And who does this? Who checks? Well, this was exactly the question that I raised, that I had as a citizen. A commissioner, maybe? Well, I was denied any answer. It's not the commissioners that approve, because that's a political vote, all in all. If the majority of the commission votes, that report is accepted. I'm interested in the experts that drafted. If you build a house in Romania and an expert comes to check if you installed power or water lines properly, when they give you the approval or the confirmation, you have the name of that person, and you see their profession, engineer, consultant, and so forth. But Romania, every year such a report is drafted. Romania is criticized. Based on this report, Romania cannot access Schengen areas, and it is threatened to be cut off from European funds. But they don't answer who writes the report. And I have to say that the official answer from the European Commission is that we cannot tell you who writes the report. So we go back, we circle to the entire discussion or debate that we had in this conference. We speak of sovereignty. Romania, when as a citizen you face an issue with the law, you go to the Constitutional Court. If you don't go there, you have to go to the Ombudsman, and the Ombudsman goes to the Constitutional Court, and there's a series of leverages. You write to your elect, you send a petition. But in this case, when we speak of a member state of the European Union that has the Constitutional Court, government, justice, the Commission the country has to implement a report with recommendations. Apart from the fact that they are wrong and contradictory, they are issued by entities whose name we don't know. And this actually depicts the situation that the European Union is in. Because as the colleague in Poland said, it's an issue with the measures set from the center of the European member states, municipalities. They come with this one size fits all. Well, it's not possible. Let me give you a specific example in Romania what such a size means. In a city, I spoke to the mayor, and they said, I have to purchase with European funds buses, but I have problems with the streets. I have to buy electrical vehicles, electrical buses, and I have problems with the streets. What do we do? Well, we can't access money for infrastructure because that was previously. So it's like in a bad joke with, or that moral with everybody going their own direction and not working together. The reason for breaching these fundamental rights, we heard the perspective of each attorney about the fundamental right and defending it. Unfortunately, Romania, not the EU. So in Romania, there are situations in which fundamental issues about the existence of the state, of the nation, and observing the rights, the fundamental rights and freedoms of every person are ridiculized, ignored, or abandoned by their elect and by large part of the press. And that's why I'm happy that we have this debate. I'm happy of the great interest that we see from the very many questions raised. And I do hope that this debate continues. Although this tour started by the ECR group stops in every European capital for 1 hour or so, now in Romania we need an open debate where all voices are heard. And don't you think of doing this? Now, I go back to Madam Silvia Uskov that earlier referred to social media accounts blocked. Madam Uskov, you spoke of things that some of us are really frightened by. What can an attorney do in this respect? First of all, the attorney has to raise awareness to the others with respect to the danger. They have to go to court for certain regulations to be taken. And of course, these have to be used because the EU, with respect to AI, is at the border of the opportunity of becoming quite the power alongside the US and China. But we have to consider the need to protect the fundamental rights of the European citizens. As you know, the EU already has a regulation focusing on the basis, the idea of using or developing AI. This regulation limits, restricts, regulates the processing of personal data. But this was proven to be insufficient. And at the beginning of the 2020s, there was this policy of European rights in this respect. There was a survey performed by Deloitte for the European Commission to implement a way of civil liability in this field. And what caught my eye lately was the concern of the US, for example, to discuss about a digital law applied by itself, adaptive and coded. To give you an example, if now we drive a vehicle, we can stop at red, otherwise we might be sanctioned because we don't observe the law. Now, once we have those automated vehicles operated worldwide, it's not going to depend on us to stop the car when we see a red light. The car will do this. And the legal norm will be encoded, will be input in the algorithm of that vehicle. And I think this is a clear example of how the law can move from constraint to an abuse, if you want, or an element of power against the citizen. The state authority in this respect is shown through an algorithm, not through a legal norm.
Imagine a different example about the right to vote or the right to healthcare services, and then you will see the impact on the fundamental rights. And this paradigm shift may remind us of the motto of the EU, united in diversity, and make us reflect on the imperative to have a joint regulation policy at EU level without moving away from what matters most, namely the person, the individual. Thank you very much, Mrs. Uskov. One last question for Mrs. Racoviceanu. Someone asking what happens with the case Robert Roșu. Mrs. Racoviceanu, you obviously surely know about the case. Yes, I do. I do know about. I'm aware of the case. This is the most unpleasant example in the past few months in our profession. Yes, we have a colleague, an attorney convicted, apparently, based on the information we have now, for actions related to the exercise of his profession. He has been detained for 60 days without a conviction or an order already issued. The Bar Association in Romania already notified other international associations, the European Bar Association, and they all supported the Romanian lawyers. We are going to further protest the gesture of convicting for acts performed during the exercise of the profession. We cannot agree with this. Thank you very much, Mrs. Racoviceanu. I think we have already exceeded our time. Yes, I do have one more minute for you, Mr. Terhes, as the main organizer of our conference, and I understand this is just the beginning of a long series of debates, meetings, and similar events. But before that, because I mentioned Bucharest, and I mentioned this is the fourth stop in our conference, and let's see the fifth. Let's watch a message of Mr. Jean-Paul Prison, who is the leader of the SGP delegation in the European Parliament. Let's move to The Hague, where the European tour will have its fifth stop.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, my name is Bert-Jan Ruijsen, member of the European Parliament from the Netherlands. Thank you for this excellent conference from Romania. Now it's my pleasure to continue our European tour by inviting you by the Netherlands. The Netherlands is a country well known for its colorful agriculture. Farmers and traders work together to deliver solid results. We learned that we have to work together to fight against elements like the sea. In the same spirit of solidarity, the Netherlands was among the founding fathers of the European cooperation. However, the European internal market we founded in 1957 was modest, far modest than the EU is now. And for those who prefer a federal superstate, it is still too modest. It's time for us to stop and think. How much closer can this ever closer union actually become? I think we need an ever more flexible union, a Europe that allows more opt-outs for member states. This will be on the agenda for our event in the Netherlands. You are welcome to the next stop of the ECR tour on the future of Europe, the SGP delegation conference on the Thursday, 1st of April. Hope to see you all there. Thank you.
În Haga, pe 1 aprilie, acolo va fi.
In The Hague, April 1st, we will have the 5th stop of the ECR European tour. So, Mr. Terhes, we save the best for the last. So let's see a conclusion for our extremely interesting meeting with many issues highlighted very pointedly. I'd like to mention, for those who do not know, your party is the only member of ECR right now. This is why we have this conference, because we do care about the present, but we do care even more about the future. What will happen tomorrow? What do you think? To be able to answer your question, it's important to see what happened yesterday, right? Someone said that an amnesic does not have a future because they don't know their past and they don't know where they are going to. When we speak about the European Union, it's important for us to go back in time to what Europe was after the Second World War. Nations decimated, millions of deaths on all sides, and the Iron Curtain. In this context, for the founding fathers of the European project, the idea was, what should we choose now? Should we go on fighting and get weaker and generate millions of deaths, or look for a solution to cooperate, for a solution for mutual support to generate prosperity and then hence peace? And this is how the European project was born and developed into what we call today the European Union. If we look at the statements and the documents of the founding fathers, we see that the centrality of this union, of this European community, the focal point is not the state but the individual, as one of the lawyers mentioned earlier. So the very foundation of the European Union now is the safeguarding the rights and the fundamental freedoms of each individual. The question is, who can do that? Can a bureaucracy in Brussels, which was not elected by anyone, which is not known by anyone, as I gave you the example of the CMB report, which is not known in terms of authors, or the entity which can best defend the national interest is the nation. And the history showed that in such cases the best solution is to strengthen the nation state, and the Union showed us. On the other hand, we have the example of the Soviet Union, which was imposed by force, which tried to denationalize the countries which were included in it, a nation which disregarded the fundamental human rights because they said the individual is not born with such rights, and the rights a person had in the former communist state were privileges granted by the communist state, and when the state gives, the state can take away. And our position is that every individual is unique, was created by God, resembling God, and each individual has fundamental rights which the state does not only have to recognize but also has to protect and recognize. And then we need to discuss what kind of European Union do we want and what should be Romania's position in this European Union. And our position is that we belong in Europe, we belong in the European Union, but what happens now in the European Union with this attempt to take over the powers and decisions from a local to central level actually impacts on the fundamental human rights. And the solution we are proposing is precisely the solution of the founding fathers of the European project, the union of nations, a union based on diversity, united for the same goal. And I believe this is the ideal, our goal. And I'm happy for this opportunity. I'm happy that we managed to bring before the public opinion in Romania various discussions and viewpoints which have been ignored for years by the media. And if the tour of this conference organized by the ECR group in the European Parliament will continue in The Hague and in other European capitals after today, since many people have contacted us, wanted to participate. I think this opened a good opportunity for discussion. So this is why we will not stop here. We are going to continue such discussions in Romania to discuss such problems from a Romanian perspective, to see how they impact us. You should know that Mr. Cristian Terhes is the main organizer of this conference, and he is very active in the social media. I met him there, and talking about the social media, in the end, please follow. If you are concerned with the future of Europe and the future of our children, follow the hashtag #ResetEU. Thank you, Mr. Terhes. I hope everybody will have a beautiful evening, beautiful spring.
There's a new hope for Europe. A Europe of jobs, prosperity, and recovery. A Europe that safeguards its citizens and borders. There's a Europe that respects its national democracies, that protects the environment and nurtures its rural economies. There's a Europe that does less and does it better, that cuts bureaucracy and adds value for you. There's a Europe that looks inwards and outwards, for trade, for security, and for friendship. It's time to get Europe under control and back on track. It's time for a new hope for Europe. It's time to reset EU.